His gun was already out when he walked through the door, pointed straight at her face. "Open the safe." Cassie's hands found the key, trembling. She had never spoken a word in her life, born mute, and right now her silence felt like a trap closing around her. Lily, her younger sister, was already locked in their SUV outside. He had made her look at that first, made sure she understood. She opened the safe. He took every bill. Then he pointed at the black SUV outside. "Fill it up." 2:17 in the morning, Highway 89. The fluorescent lights of Dusty Fork Gas and Go buzzed over an empty lot. Boyd's SUV, a Harley at pump 7, and Cassie walking toward pump 4 on legs that barely remembered how to move. She grabbed the nozzle with both hands, shaking, eyes moving across the lot. Margaret Webb's voice, 2 years ago, 7 taps on any metal surface. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. At pump 7, Ray Callahan heard it. He watched her, watched the lot. Something was wrong, and he felt it before he understood it. He pulled out his phone and said 3 words. What happened next on that highway? Stay with me. This is Hardtails. Ray didn't move. Not yet. He stood at pump 7 with his hand still on the nozzle, watching the girl at pump 4 the way a man watches something he can't quite name, but knows is wrong. The shaking hands. The eyes that kept cutting sideways toward the store. The way her whole body was doing one thing while her mind was somewhere else entirely. He'd seen that before. A long time ago. On someone he hadn't been able to help. Inside the store, Boyd was still at the register. Cassie could see him through the glass. Head down, stuffing bills into the duffel bag, not looking up. Dennis Rourke was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, phone in one hand, eyes drifting between her and the lot. Dennis was 37 years old and had the particular stillness of a man who had learned that looking bored was the same as looking innocent. He wore a blue Mercer freight jacket with a small logo on the left chest pocket. He had a habit of tapping his left boot against the concrete when he was waiting. 2 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause. A rhythm so consistent, Cassie had clocked it within the first minute. She had been clocking everything. She ran the numbers the way she had been running them since the moment Boyd walked through her door. 2 exits, the road going north, the road going south, both of them in Boyd's hands the moment he decided to move. Dennis was between her and the store. The SUV was running. She could hear the idle from here, low and steady, the engine of a vehicle that fully expected to be somewhere else within minutes. Lily was in the back of it, zip-tied, probably terrified, probably trying to stay quiet the way Cassie had always taught her to stay quiet when things got bad. Stay small, stay still, wait for me. That was what Cassie had always told her. Since they were kids. Since their mother left and their father stopped being someone worth staying for. Stay small, stay still, wait for me. She had always come back. She needed to come back tonight. Boyd zipped the duffel bag. Cassie watched his hands through the glass. He was methodical. No rush, no nerves. The movements of a man who had done this before and expected it to end the same way it always ended. Clean, quiet. Nobody the wiser until morning. He was 6'1" and built like someone who had spent his 20s doing physical work and his 40s sitting behind a desk. The muscles still there, but softened at the edges. He moved through the store with the comfortable authority of a man accustomed to owning whatever room he was in. He had not looked at her once since walking her to the pump. That was the thing about Boyd Mercer. He didn't need to look at you to control you. He had already done that work. He reached for his phone, checked something, put it back in his pocket. 30 seconds, maybe less. Cassie's eyes moved across the lot one more time. The Harley at pump 7, The man beside it, older, silver hair, leather vest with patches she couldn't read from here. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking at the road. He was looking at her, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned a long time ago that the most important things happen in the spaces between noise. She didn't know who he was. She didn't need to. She needed him to be the right kind of person. Just once. Just tonight. The pump hummed in her hand. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Dennis shifted his weight against the doorframe and looked down at his phone for the third time in 2 minutes. There it was. Cassie's fingers tightened around the nozzle. Margaret Webb's voice came back to her from a community safety training 2 years ago. 7 steady taps on any metal surface. She had smiled and nodded that afternoon. She had thought it was the kind of thing you learned and never used, like the Heimlich maneuver, or how to change a tire in the dark. She had gone home and made dinner and helped Lily study for her chemistry exam and not thought about it once. Until now. Boyd's hand found a horn handle. 1. The metal was cold under her knuckles. She kept her face forward, kept her eyes on the middle distance, kept her breathing slow and steady, the way you breathe when everything inside you is screaming, and you cannot make a single sound. 2, 3. Dennis glanced up, looked at her, looked back at his phone. 4. Boyd pushed the door open halfway. The little bell above it rang. The same bell that rang every time a customer walked in, cheerful and indifferent, marking entrances and exits with the same careless chime. 5. Ray Callahan's hand was moving on his own nozzle. 6. Boyd stepped out onto the concrete duffel bag over one shoulder and looked across the lot. His eyes found Cassie the way they always found her, like a calculation, not a person. He checked the SUV. He checked Dennis. He checked the road in both directions. He did not check pump 7. The pump clicked off, full tank. The lot went completely silent except for the buzzing of the fluorescent lights and the low idle of the SUV engine and the sound of Highway 89 stretching out empty in both directions into the dark Arizona desert. Boyd started walking toward her. Cassie did not look at Ray. She could not look at Ray. If Boyd saw her look at Ray, it was over before it started. She kept her eyes on the ground, on her hands, on the nozzle she was replacing, in its holster, the way she replaced it every single night for the past 2 years, without thinking once about what it felt like to hold a piece of metal and understand that it might be the last thing you ever touched. Boyd reached her. His hand came down on her shoulder. Good girl. She didn't flinch. She had learned not to flinch. Behind her, 12 feet away, Ray Callahan turned away from pump 7 so that neither Boyd nor Dennis could see his face. His thumb found his phone. His eyes were already moving, counting the vehicles, reading the lot, calculating the distance to the road. He had been doing this kind of math for 30 years. He brought the phone to his ear. 3 words. Low and flat, the way you speak when urgency and calm are the same thing. Boyd's hand steered Cassie toward the SUV. Dennis fell in behind them. The duffel bag swung at Boyd's side, heavy with everything he had taken. He had no idea what he had set in motion. Somewhere out on Highway 89, in the dark that stretches between Ash Fork and everywhere else, engines were already turning over. But to understand why Ray Callahan recognized those 7 taps, why he knew exactly what they meant before the 7th one landed, we need to go back further than tonight. Back to who Cassie Hartwell was before Boyd Mercer decided she was worth taking. And back to the woman who taught a mute girl that silence doesn't have to mean helpless. Cassie Hartwell had been running on 4 hours of sleep and black coffee since she was 19 years old. That was when their father walked out the second time, the time that stuck, and left her with a 17-year-old sister, a two-bedroom rental on the wrong side of Ash Fork, and a collection of unpaid utility bills held together by a binder clip. No note, no forwarding address, just a half-empty bottle of Jim Beam on the kitchen counter and the particular silence of a house that had been holding its breath for years and finally exhaled. Cassie got the night shift at Dusty Fork Gas and Go within a week. She'd applied in person the way she always did. A notepad in her back pocket, a pen behind her ear, a handwritten card she kept laminated in her wallet that said, "I am mute. I communicate by writing. I am a fast worker and I don't call in sick." The owner, a heavy-set man named Gerald Purcell, who smelled like motor oil and microwaved burritos, had read the card twice, looked at her for a long moment and said, "Night shift pays an extra $1.50 an hour and nobody else wants it." She had taken it without negotiating. That was 5 years ago. She had not missed a single shift. The work suited her in a way that most people wouldn't understand. The hours between 10 at night and 6 in the morning were the quietest hours. Fewer customers, fewer conversations she had to navigate with a notepad, fewer people who got uncomfortable with the silence and tried to fill it with questions she had answered 1,000 times. Out here on Highway 89, the trucks came through on schedule and the regulars knew her by name and nobody expected her to be anything other than what she was. She kept the lot clean. She kept the coffee fresh. She kept a small photograph of Lily taped to the inside of the register drawer. Lily at 18, laughing at something off camera, her hair pulled back the way she always wore it when she was studying. That photograph was the reason Cassie got out of bed every afternoon. Lily was at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, 40 miles south, studying biology on a partial scholarship and a waitressing job that kept her in ramen and textbooks. She called every Tuesday and Thursday evening, video calls so Cassie could sign back, and they talked for an hour about everything and nothing. Lily's professors, Cassie's regulars, the leak under the kitchen sink that neither of them had gotten around to fixing. The way the desert looked at sunrise when Cassie was driving home and the sky went from black to purple to a color that didn't have a name. They had nobody else. They had each other. It had always been enough. Boyd Mercer had first appeared on a Wednesday night 3 weeks before the robbery. He came in at 11:40, bought a bottle of water and a bag of peanuts, paid cash, and stood at the counter 40 seconds longer than necessary, scanning the layout of the store with the methodical attention of a man who was not browsing but measuring. He wore a gray-collared shirt with Mercer Freight LLC embroidered on the chest pocket. He asked Cassie if the coffee was fresh. She wrote on her notepad, "Made it at 11." He nodded and left. She thought nothing of it. He came back the following Monday. Same time, same cash. This time he bought a road atlas and a cup of the coffee and stood near the window for several minutes, looking out at the lot. He had a phone call. She could see his lips moving, and he turned his back to her for most of it. When he left, he held the door for a woman coming in behind him, the automatic courtesy of a man who understood the value of appearing unremarkable. The third visit was a Friday at 2 in the morning, when the lot was empty, and Gerald's south camera had been showing an error light for 11 days, and the highway outside was as quiet as it got. He came in and bought nothing. He stood at the counter and looked at Cassie for a long moment without moving, and she felt, in the skin level, body before mind way that sometimes arrives before conscious thought can catch up, that something was wrong. She reached for her notepad. He left before she finished writing. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself this through 3 more quiet nights, and one Tuesday call with Lily about a professor who gave too much homework, and a kitchen drain that was backing up again. She told herself this the way you tell yourself things you need to be true in order to keep going. She was still telling herself this the night Travis Webb knocked on Lily's apartment door in Flagstaff at 1:14 in the morning, holding up a package he claimed the building manager had asked him to deliver. Lily opened the door. Travis was 32 years old and carried himself with the deliberate ease of a man who had spent years practicing how to seem harmless. He had a large cardboard box under one arm and a tired, friendly expression and nothing about him, in the 3 seconds Lily had to evaluate him, read as dangerous. She reached for the box. He had her zip-tied, and in the back of the SUV in under 4 minutes she did not scream. Not because she couldn't, but because Travis had shown her something in those first seconds that made noise seem like the fastest possible path to something much worse. He was very good at showing people that thing. Boyd had hired him specifically for that skill. By the time Boyd walked into Dusty Fork Gas and Go at 2:17 in the morning, Lily had been in the back of that vehicle for 63 minutes. Boyd didn't say anything when he came in. He didn't need to. He walked to the counter, set his phone face up on the glass, and let Cassie look at the screen. Lily, wristbound, eyes red, alive. Boyd tapped the phone once with one finger, the gesture of a man pointing to a fact, and then he reached into the duffel bag and placed the gun on the counter beside it. Cassie looked at her sister's face on that screen. The coffee maker gurgled behind her. The fluorescent light above the third aisle buzzed with a flicker it had had for 2 weeks. Outside, the highway was empty in both directions, the way it was empty most nights out here. Just the dark and the desert, and the occasional set of headlights passing through without stopping. Then she reached under the counter for the key to the safe. She had always come back for Lily. Every single time, since they were kids, since their father left and the world stopped being something either of them could rely on. She was going to come back tonight. She just didn't know how yet. Cassie had been 8 years old the first time she understood that silence could be a weapon used against you. A boy at Ash Fork Elementary had figured out that if he stood behind her and said things, cruel things, the kind that 8-year-olds say when they want to watch something break, she couldn't report him quickly enough. By the time she got her notepad out and wrote it down, he was already somewhere else, already innocent, already just a kid, standing there with his hands in his pockets. She had gone home that day and sat in the kitchen for a long time. Her mother had found her there, asked what was wrong. Cassie had written it all down, 3 pages, in her careful block letters, and her mother had read it slowly and folded the pages and held them in her lap. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Baby, the world is going to tell you that being quiet means being powerless. Don't you believe it? Quiet people see more. Quiet people notice more. And quiet people, the right quiet people, know how to make noise in ways that loud people never figure out." Cassie had not fully understood that then. She understood it completely now. But the specific knowledge that saved her life on that Tuesday morning in March did not come from her mother. It came from a woman named Margaret Webb. On an unremarkable Wednesday afternoon 2 years before Boyd Mercer ever set foot in Dusty Fork Gas and Go. Margaret Webb was 62 years old, 5'4", with silver hair cut short, and the kind of posture that comes from spending 30 years telling people things they needed to hear, whether they wanted to hear them or not. She was the head nurse at Flagstaff Regional Medical Center, and she ran a community safety program out of the hospital's meeting room on the second Wednesday of every month, free of charge, open to anyone, advertised on a single flyer pinned to the bulletin board at the Ash Fork Post Office. Cassie had gone because Gerald Purcell had mentioned it, and because it was her day off, and because she had nothing else to do. She had expected a PowerPoint about locking your car doors. What she got was Margaret Webb at the front of a room of 14 people, mostly women, a few men, a teenager who had come with her mother, speaking with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades in emergency rooms watching what happened when people ran out of options. Most safety training teaches you what to do when you have choices, Margaret said. I want to talk about what to do when you don't. She looked around the room. Her eyes settled on Cassie, not with discomfort but with recognition. The look of someone who understood immediately that this was a person who had already spent a lifetime solving the problem Margaret was about to describe. Some of you can't call for help the way other people can. Some of you are in situations where calling out loud would make things worse. Some of you might find yourselves somewhere, someday, where the only tool you have is your hand and whatever surface is in front of you. She picked up a metal water bottle from the table beside her. 7 taps, even spacing, like a heartbeat but slower, on any metal surface, a pipe, a pump, a railing, a door frame. It carries. It travels through metal the way sound travels through water. She demonstrated 7 clean, evenly spaced taps, each one deliberate, each one distinct. It doesn't sound like nerves. It doesn't sound like habit. It sounds like a message. And anyone who has been taught to listen for it will know exactly what it means. Someone in the back asked who would know to listen for it. Margaret smiled. The smile of someone who had prepared for that question. More people than you think. We've been distributing this signal through community safety networks, through first responder training, through outreach programs in highway corridors across 5 states, truck stops, gas stations, diners, anywhere a person might find themselves in a situation where speaking isn't possible. A pause. It is not a guarantee. Nothing is a guarantee. And something, in the right moment, is everything. Cassie wrote in her notepad. 7 taps. Even metal surface. She underlined it once. The room smelled like burnt coffee, and the warm institutional dustiness of a space that saw too much fluorescent light. Someone had brought cookies on a paper plate that sat untouched by the door. The teenager in the 3rd row kept glancing at her phone under the desk. Outside the window, a maintenance cart rolled past with a squeaky wheel. Completely random, nothing like 7. Cassie went home and helped Lily study for her chemistry exam and made pasta for dinner and did not think about it again for 2 years. Until the night Boyd Mercer put his phone on her counter and showed her sister's face. Standing at pump 4 with her knuckles against the cold metal, she did not think about whether it would work. She did not think about whether Ray Callahan was the right kind of person. She thought about Margaret Webb's voice, and the feeling of metal under her hand, and the fact that Lily was 19 years old and had a biology exam on Friday and was not going to miss it. 7 taps. That was all she had. She used every one of them. Ray Ridgeline Callahan had not planned to stop at Dusty Fork Gas and go that night. He had planned to ride straight through from Flagstaff to Kingman. 4 hours, no stops, the kind of ride he took when he needed to clear his head, and the desert at night was the only thing that worked. 58 years old, 31 of them with the Hells Angels Arizona chapter. And there were still nights when the only prescription was Highway 89 in the dark with the throttle open, and the world reduced to headlight and asphalt and wind. He had stopped because his tank was reading low and because Dusty Fork was the only light visible for 12 miles in either direction, and because he had a rule about empty tanks in the desert that he had made for himself at 23 and never broken since. That was the only reason, or so he thought. He pulled in at 2:14 in the morning, 3 minutes before Boyd Mercer walked out with a duffel bag full of cash and a plan that had worked 11 times before without a single complication. Ray had not noticed the SUV right away. He had noticed it the way you notice everything when you've spent 30 years cultivating the habit of noticing.
A background registration, filed away. Black Ford Expedition. Engine running, rear windows tinted dark.
Parked at an angle that put the driver's door closest to the store entrance and blocked the sightline from the highway. The kind of parking that looks like carelessness and is actually calculation. He had filed that away too. He dismounted, ran his card, picked up the nozzle, and looked up at the lot the way he always looked at lots. One slow sweep, left to right, nothing missed. That was when he saw her. Pump 4. Young woman. Both hands on the nozzle, which was unusual. Shoulders pulled forward and in. Eyes moving in a pattern he recognized. Not the casual glancing of someone bored, but the systematic scanning of someone cataloging exits and threats and running distances in her head. He had seen that pattern before. He had seen it on his sister Carol 34 years ago in the parking lot of a grocery store in Kingman when she was married to a man named Dwayne Pritchard who had a talent for leaving bruises in places that didn't show. Ray had been 24 years old. He had seen Carol across that parking lot doing exactly that scan, measuring the distance to her car, to Dwayne, to the store entrance, running the same math over and over and finding no good answer. He had gotten Carol out. Eventually, after too long and too many parking lots and one night that still woke him sometimes at 3 in the morning. He had never forgotten what that scan looked like. He watched the girl at pump 4 for 30 seconds, long enough to confirm what he was seeing, long enough to clock Dennis at the door. That blue Mercer freight jacket, positioned between the girl and the entrance in a way that was not accidental. Long enough to look back at the Expedition with its running engine and blacked-out rear windows and understand the particular angle it was parked at, facing out, not in. The way a vehicle is positioned when the person parking it is already thinking about leaving fast. Then he heard it. 7 taps, even spacing. Metal on metal coming from pump 4, barely audible under the hum of the lot. Ray had sat in on a Cochise County Highway Corridor Safety Briefing 18 months ago, a joint session between the County Sheriff's Office and several community organizations, a rainy Tuesday in Bisbee that he had almost skipped. A woman named Margaret Webb had described a distress signal her network had been distributing through communities along the major highway corridors of the Southwest. 7 taps, even spacing, any metal surface. The kind of signal a person could send when speaking was not an option. He had listened. He had filed it away. 1. Ray's hand stopped moving on his nozzle. 2. 3. Dennis glanced up from his phone. Looked at the girl, looked back down. 4. 5. Inside the store, through the glass, a man in a grey shirt was closing a duffel bag. 6. Ray turned slightly away, just enough that the man inside, when he looked up, would see a biker at a pump, minding his own business on an empty highway at 2 in the morning. Unremarkable, safe to ignore. 7. He brought the phone up the way you check a message. Casual, unhurried, he pressed one number. A voice he had known for 22 years answered on the second ring. No greeting. Just the particular silence of a man who understood that a call at this hour from this number was not social. Ray kept his eyes moving across the lot. The man in the grey shirt was heading for the door. Dusty Fork. Now, he hung up. Boyd pushed through the door. The bell rang. He looked across the lot, straight at Cassie, the glance of a man confirming inventory, and then walked toward her. He did not look at pump 7. Ray replaced his nozzle, folded his receipt, put it in his vest pocket with the movements of a man with nowhere in particular to be. Boyd's hand came down on Cassie's shoulder and walked her toward the SUV. Dennis fell in behind them. Neither of them looked at pump 7. Ray walked to his Harley and sat down on it and did not start the engine. He just waited. Because on Highway 89, sound travels a long way in the desert at night. And somewhere to the north, getting closer with every second, was a sound that Boyd Mercer was going to hear very soon. Boyd had the SUV in reverse when he heard it. Faint at first, the kind of sound you might dismiss as wind or distance. A low rumble rolling across the desert floor from the north, the way distant thunder rolls before the sky shows you anything. He stopped the SUV. Dennis heard it too. He looked at Boyd. Boyd looked at the road. The rumble got louder. Then the headlights appeared, not one, not two, but a line of them, stretching back into the dark as far as either man could see, coming down Highway 89 in formation, steady and deliberate, the way a river moves when it has decided where it is going. Boyd counted. He stopped counting at 15. "Drive," he said. Dennis put the SUV in drive and pulled toward the south exit. Ray Callahan's Harley was parked across it. Ray sat with his hands on his thighs, engine off, watching Boyd's windshield with the expression of a man who has already seen how this ends and is in no particular hurry. Boyd hit the brakes. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The SUV idled. Ray sat. The line of headlights from the north kept coming, the rumble filling up the lot now, pressing against the buzz of the fluorescent lights and the silence of the desert, until there was nothing else. 19 Hells Angels Arizona chapter bikes rolled into Dusty Fork Gas and Go and arranged themselves with the unhurried precision of people who have done this before. They blocked the north exit. They blocked the south exit. They spread across the lot in a loose arc that left Boyd's SUV at the center with nowhere useful to go. Nobody got off their bike. Nobody needed to. Ray dismounted. He walked to the driver's side of the SUV and stood there, hands at his sides. He didn't knock on the window. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there the way a mountain stands, present, requiring no announcement. Boyd lowered the window. Ray looked at him for a long moment, took in the grey shirt, the duffel on the back seat, the practiced blankness on Boyd's face. Then Ray looked at Dennis, who was studying the floor. Then Ray looked at Cassie, her hands in her lap, her face turned toward the window, her whole body held in the stillness of someone who has placed everything on a single number and is waiting to see where it lands. "Where's the other girl?" Ray said. It was not a question. It was a statement with a question mark at the end. The kind that tells you the person asking already knows the answer and is giving you one opportunity to choose the easier version of what happens next. Boyd said nothing. Ray nodded once as if that confirmed something. He walked around the front of the SUV to the rear, tried the handle, locked, looked back at Boyd through the windshield. Key. Boyd looked at the motorcycles blocking every exit. Looked at Dennis, who was examining his own hands with great care. Then Boyd reached into his pocket and held the key out the window without looking at Ray. Ray took it, walked to the rear, unlocked the door and pulled it open. Lily Hartwell was curled against the far wall of the cargo area with her knees pulled to her chest, wrists zip-tied in front of her. eyes red from an hour of quiet crying she had done as carefully as she could, because Travis had been very specific about what noise would cost her. She was wearing her gray Northern Arizona University sweatshirt and had one sock on and one sock missing, and was shaking with the whole body tremor of someone who has been running on adrenaline and terror for 63 minutes with nothing left to spend. She looked at Ray, at the patches on his vest, at the line of motorcycles behind him. Ray pulled a folding knife from his pocket, opened it, and cut the zip tie in one clean motion. He peeled the tape from her mouth with the particular care of someone who understands that gentleness is not softness, that it is, in certain moments, the most precise tool available. Lily pulled in a long breath. Then she said her sister's name. Cassie was already out of the passenger seat. She came around the side of the SUV with the contained urgency of someone who has been holding herself together through pure will for over an hour, and can feel that will finally, now that the reason for it is almost within reach, starting to release. She reached the open door, and Lily reached for her, and they held on to each other in the cargo bay of that vehicle, while the fluorescent lights buzzed and 19 men on motorcycles looked at the road and said nothing, because some moments do not need witnesses. They only need to be allowed to happen. Ray stepped back and gave them the space. Then he walked back to the driver's side. Boyd had not moved. He sat with his hands on the wheel and the expression of a man who has run every available calculation and arrived at the same answer each time. There was no version of this that ended well for Boyd Mercer. He knew that now. Ray leaned against the door frame and looked at Boyd the way you look at something that made its choices a long time ago and has been living with them ever since. 11 times, Ray said quietly.
Boyd looked at him. That's what they're going to find.
When they go through your phone, when they go through your truck, when they start pulling on the threads, a pause. 11 women, 11 families. Another pause, shorter. You want to tell me about them now, or let them find it on their own? Boyd said nothing. In the distance, still far, but closing, the sound of sirens. Ray's people had made the call when they rolled out. That was how it always worked. You called them when you moved, not after, because the difference between justice and something else entirely was a phone call made at the right time. Dennis opened the passenger door and ran. He made it approximately 40 feet before two of Ray's people stepped off their bikes and positioned themselves in his path, with the minimal effort of men who do not need to raise their voices or their hands to communicate that there is nowhere useful to run. Dennis put his hands up. One of Ray's people produced a zip tie. Dennis looked at it and then put his wrists together. Boyd didn't run. Boyd sat with his hands on the wheel and stared through the windshield at the Arizona desert and said nothing until the Mojave County Sheriff's deputies arrived 8 minutes and 40 seconds later and opened his door and told him to step out. He stepped out. He did not look at Cassie. He did not look at Lily. He looked at the concrete in front of his feet and kept looking at it while they put his hands behind his back and told him his rights in the flat practice tone of people who say these words many times a week and mean them every time. Ray watched from across the lot. When a deputy walked Boyd past him toward the cruiser, Boyd stopped. He stood there a moment, with his hands cuffed behind him and his eyes on the ground. Then he said, very quietly, "How did you know?" Ray looked at him. "She told me," he said. Boyd looked up. Cassie stood 20 feet away with her arm around Lily's shoulders, watching him, with the clear, level gaze of someone who made a decision with the only thing she had and found out, on the other side of it, that it was enough. Boyd looked back at the ground. The deputy walked him to the cruiser. They found 11 names in Boyd Mercer's phone. Not contacts, not saved, numbers. Just names, written in the Notes app in his own handwriting, each one followed by a date and a 2-letter state abbreviation. 11 names, 11 dates across 4 years, 11 states from Arizona to Montana, following the interstate system the way a scar follows a wound. The Mojave County Sheriff's Office called in the FBI by 6 in the morning. By 8, they had matched 4 of the 11 names to missing persons reports. By noon, 7. The remaining 4 took longer. Women with no one filing reports, no photographs in a database, no family with the resources to make noise on their behalf. Women who had existed in the particular kind of invisibility that people like Boyd Mercer specifically looked for. The evidence in the SUV alone was enough for 3 federal charges before investigators finished processing the vehicle. The storage unit outside Kingman that Travis Webb led them to, in exchange for a cooperation agreement his attorney described as favorable, and which turned out to be considerably less favorable than represented, added 6 more. Boyd Mercer was charged with 11 counts of human trafficking, 2 counts of kidnapping, 1 count of armed robbery, and additional federal charges that his court-appointed attorney described, in a rare moment of candor, as extensive. He was held without bail. Dennis Rourke began cooperating within 48 hours. Travis Webb's cooperation came faster but bought less. He would be in his mid-50s before he saw the outside of a federal facility. Boyd did not cooperate. Not at first. He sat in the Mojave County holding cell for 4 days and said nothing beyond his name and his request for counsel. He ate when they brought food. He slept when it was dark. He stared at the water-stained ceiling of his cell, a crack running from the light fixture toward the far wall when it wasn't. The deputies noted in their logs that he had the look of a man engaged in a long, private argument with himself. On the 5th day, federal investigator Sandra Okafor sat down across from him in the interview room. 44 years old, 11 years working human trafficking cases, long since past being surprised by what people were capable of. She placed 1 photograph on the table between them. Not of Cassie, not of Lily. A photograph from CCTV footage at a truck stop in Barstow, California, 18 months ago. A woman walking across a parking lot at night, her face turned slightly toward the camera. The man beside her had his face turned away. Sandra Okafor slid the photograph across the table. Her name. Boyd looked at the photograph. He looked at the woman's face. Turned toward the camera, toward whoever might be looking, toward a world that had not been looking back. He looked at his own hands on the table, at the crack in the ceiling. Then something in the architecture of his expression shifted. There is a moment, investigators who work these cases will tell you, when a person like Boyd Mercer runs out of the fuel that has been running them. It is not guilt exactly. Not at first. It is more like exhaustion. The exhaustion of maintaining, year after year, the internal logic that allows a person to do what he had been doing and still recognize himself in a mirror. That structure requires feeding. And when a photograph of a woman's face lands on a table in front of you and you understand, in the flattest possible terms, that she is still missing and you are the reason. The structure can only hold for so long. Boyd looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at his own hands lying flat on the table in front of him. The same hands that had planned routes and made calls and opened doors and closed them again. He looked at them the way you look at something that has been with you your whole life and that you are only now, in this room under these lights, with this photograph between you and another human being, seeing clearly for the first time. Boyd said her name. Then the next one. Then, over 6 hours, with Sandra Okafor across the table and a recorder running and his attorney present, he said all 4 names. He told them the routes, the contacts, the delivery points. The names of men in Nevada, California, and Utah who had been, for years, at the other end of what Boyd was sending down the highway. By the time he finished, Sandra Okafor had filled 17 pages of notes, and the investigation had expanded into 3 additional states. Boyd Mercer was sentenced 14 months later. Judge Patricia Holloway, 67 years old, 19 years on the bench, looked at him across the courtroom before she read the sentence. You selected your victims based on their vulnerabilities. You believed that their silence, their isolation, made them powerless. You built an operation on that belief. A pause, measured and deliberate. I want you to spend the next 18 years considering what that assumption cost you and what it says about you that you made it. 18 years, no possibility of parole for the first 12. Boyd was led out without looking up. Cassie was not in the courtroom that day. She had been asked about a victim impact statement and had considered it for 3 days and then written 1 sentence on a notepad and handed it to the prosecutor. I already said everything I needed to say at pump 4. The prosecutor read it, looked at her, nodded once. She drove back to Ash Fork with Lily in the passenger seat and the windows down, the desert doing what it always does in early morning, turning from black to deep purple to that particular color that exists only in the 20 minutes before full sunrise, the color without a name in any language Cassie knew. Neither of them spoke the whole way, which was fine, because they had never needed words for the things that mattered most between them. Cassie went back to work the following week. Gerald Purcell had fixed both cameras while she was gone. He had also replaced the safe mechanism, reinforced the door latch, and installed a panic button under the counter connected directly to the Mohave County Sheriff's dispatch line. He had shown up one morning with a contractor and a locksmith and pointed at things until each thing was done. And when Cassie left a note on the counter that said, "The cameras matter. Thank you," he picked it up and read it and put it in his shirt pocket without looking at her, which was as close as Gerald Purcell got to saying, "You're welcome." 5 months after the night at Dusty Fork, on a Wednesday that happened to be the 2nd Wednesday of the month, Cassie drove to Flagstaff Regional Medical Center and walked into the community meeting room on the 2nd floor and sat down in the 2nd row. Margaret Webb was at the front of the room. She was mid-sentence when Cassie came through the door. She saw Cassie and something moved across her face, recognition, and beneath it, the specific expression of someone who teaches things hoping they will never be needed and understands, in a particular moment, that the teaching was not wasted. She didn't stop. She just nodded once, the way you nod at someone you have been waiting to see for a while. After the session, when the room had mostly cleared, Cassie walked to the front and held out a folded piece of paper. Margaret opened it. It worked. Thank you. She read it twice, which was unnecessary given that it was 4 words. Then she folded it carefully along its original crease and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket. She looked at Cassie. "Same time next month?" she said. Cassie nodded. She was there the following month, and the month after that. She sat in the 2nd row and she listened, and when Margaret got to the part about the 7 taps, demonstrating them on the metal chair back beside her, 7 clean and evenly spaced, Cassie watched the faces in the room. The women who looked at their own hands. The ones who wrote it down and underlined it. The ones whose expression shifted in the particular way that meant something had just moved from theoretical to possible. She thought about Ray Callahan, who had ridden away from Dusty Fork before the second patrol car arrived, who had left no statement and no contact information, and whose name Cassie had learned only afterward from a deputy who shrugged and said, "That's just how Ridgeline operates," in the tone of someone reporting a geographic fact, like the direction of a one-way street. She had not seen him again. She did not need to. Some people arrive in your life for exactly as long as they need to be there. They do the thing they came to do and they leave. And the shape of what they did stays long after they're gone. Ray Callahan had been at pump 7 for 11 minutes. It was enough. There is something people get wrong about silence. They think it means absence. They think it means nothing is happening, nobody is there, nobody is fighting. They think quiet people are the invisible ones, people who pass through the world without leaving a mark, without mattering in the ways that loud people matter. Boyd Mercer thought that. It was the load-bearing assumption of his entire operation. That silence was a limitation, a door left unlocked, an opportunity. He had spent 11 years walking through exactly that door. He had built a system around it. He had selected his victims based on it. He had been wrong about every part of it. Cassie Hartwell had never spoken a word in her life. She had navigated 24 years of a world not built for voices she didn't have, a world of phone calls she couldn't make, conversations she had to translate through paper and pen, moments where the distance between what she needed to say and what she could say felt like a distance with no bottom. She had built a full life inside that distance. She had raised her sister in it. She had shown up every single night for 5 years to a gas station on a desert highway and done her job without complaint and without asking anyone to make it easier. And when the moment came, when everything else was stripped away, and she had nothing left but one free hand and 6 inches of cold metal, she found a way to be heard. That is not a story about limitation. That is a story about what a person is capable of when they refuse to accept the definition of powerless that someone else has written for them. And Ray Callahan, a man whose reputation had been built across 3 decades on things that polite society prefers not to examine too closely, had been paying attention when it mattered, had heard something that most people in that lot would have dismissed, had acted without hesitation, without waiting for someone else to decide it was their problem. There is a version of that night where Ray's tank holds another 30 miles. There is a version where he stops but looks at his phone. And there is a version, the one that almost happened, where a man hears 7 taps on a metal pump at 2 in the morning and thinks, nerves, habit, the random sounds a gas station makes at night, and keeps pumping, and drives away. In those versions, Boyd Mercer drives north on Highway 89, and the desert absorbs another name, and somewhere a family waits for a call that is not going to come. We do not live in those versions. We live in the version where a woman who had never been able to rely on her voice found another way to speak, where a man who had spent 30 years being defined by the worst assumptions people made about him had spent 18 months quietly learning something most people never would. Where the distance between those two things, a woman at pump 4 and a man at pump 7, turned out to be exactly 12 feet. And 7 taps. Pay attention to the people around you, the ones who are too still, the ones whose eyes are moving in patterns that don't match the rest of their body, the ones holding themselves together with a care that is visible, if you are paying attention, from across a gas station lot at 2 in the morning. Most calls for help are not loud. Most of them are happening right now, in ordinary places, under ordinary light, while ordinary music plays and ordinary people look at their phones, and the ordinary world continues to turn. You do not have to be Ray Callahan to hear them. You just have to be paying attention. If this story reached someone who needed it today, share it. You don't know whose hands it might find its way into. And if you or someone you know needs help right now, the National Human Trafficking Hotline is available every hour of every day at 1-888-373-7888. Free. Confidential. There for exactly the moments when everything else isn't. This is Heart Tales. We'll see you next time.